Peace, love, and joy. Let us begin with the quote of the day. It says like this: the only good thing ever to come out of religion was the music. You got it, George Carlin. Okay, let us get right into it. As you may recall in our last segment, uh, drugs, organic drugs, helped me to stop being an atheist, being able to see the deep, profound wisdom in the things that are made, in the great design of the universe, in nature, in Mother Nature, and in the human body, and in everything that was created that makes such sense in harmony that you would have to be a fool to say that there is no God, that there was no designer, that there was no great brain who invented all these things. They didn't just come out of magic, or they came out of magic, but the magic of love by the man of love and the woman of love. Brothers and sisters, let us get into it. So it was drugs that brought me into the light of the reality of the spirit world. And mainly, like I was saying, there are the spiritual drugs, right? Like what it is marijuana, what it is LSD, what it is all the plants and cactuses on the planet, which are hallucinogenic. Aside from the other drugs, which are not, which are more, they're non-organic, like synthetic, like heroin, cocaine is a bit different. But I fell in love with drugs. I fell in love with the hippie revolution and all of its meaning and intent to change the world. I fell in love with the music, with the rock and roll music that started the revolution, the hippie revolution, with music with a message about changing the world and making love and instead of war, and the brotherhood of mankind. I fell in love with it all. I loved marijuana. I loved LSD. I was on a roll. But actually, I loved all drugs. I loved to feel good. I liked to party. And it was beautiful, and with the music and the whole hippie revolution. Okay, but let me tell you what happens with drugs. It's like the beginning, especially, is wonderful. It's interesting. It's exciting. It's a great experience. But eventually, what occurs is that you start to go like climbing a mountain. You start to go higher and higher and get higher and higher on drugs till you get to the top. But then, what eventually happens is you start to roll down on a roller coaster, picking up downhill speed as it goes down, as it keeps descending. And this, at one point, is what started happening to me. The drugs started to lose their magic. The hippie revolution started to lose the battle of changing the world. It was crushed. It was monopolized. It was commercialized. That's how they shut her down. They made it into something commercial, into a fad. So the battle was being lost, and the drugs were taking their toll, and I started going downhill from that mountain peak of the exhilaration and the wonderful feeling that drugs give you. Then they start to turn on you and give you bad feelings. The same is true even like drugs like heroin. It's the most pleasurable drug on planet Earth, and you begin a real love affair with Sister Heroin, but then that love affair turns into a nightmare because she starts to demand from you more than she gives, and it's no longer you're no longer getting high and enjoying the pleasures. You're just trying to get normal every time you shoot up. And the same is true with all drugs. They lose their magic, but some drugs you become addicted. You're addicted. And with me, this started happening, And with the LSD, I started having bad trips. I was losing control of the LSD. I was losing control of my mind. I was losing control of my thought pattern. I was getting lost in the sauce and confused and disoriented. I started to lose it. And depression. I lost my compass. I lost my compass in this great hippie revolution and drug revolution in my life. I started losing it. At first, like I said, it did me some good. It did me some good. It helped me to see that there is a God and that there is a power behind Mother Nature that makes sense. But then, like I said, it's like climbing a mountain, and when you get to the peak, then you start descending down to self-destruction. And that's the way I was, and that's where I was headed. And that's when I knew I needed help. And I knew I wasn't inclined for doctors or treatment centers or stuff like that, or rehabs. I knew that the help I needed was spiritual. But I did not like Christians. I found them to be superficial and phony and clannish. That's what I found them to be. So I did not like Christians, and self-righteous. As I was occasionally, I would read the Bible a little bit, and I started getting little glimpses that Jesus Christ was different than Christians. He was sort of a hippie. He was crucified with criminals, executed with common criminals. He turned water into wine. He hung out with women of bad reputation. I started to like Jesus. I never developed a dislike toward Jesus Christ himself. I just developed a strong dislike toward his so-called followers, the Christians. They didn't have long hair like Jesus. Most of them had very short hair. And they had this superior attitude. So I did not like Christians. So I figured I better search in some kind of strange religion or something. Buddhism or whatever. I needed help. At this point in my life, something strange happened. Like as I was telling you before, I was raised in my grandma's house with my cousin, who was more or less my same age, and we both embarked on the hippie revolution and the drug experience together. We formed this gang. And my cousin was sort of like, he was kind of like a leader type guy, very charismatic and everything. And, a lot of people followed him and admired him. He was like, he knew how to handle his drugs, man. He was a pretty cool guy. So what happened was that one day he was on LSD. He had taken two little tablets of orange sunshine. That was the LSD of our that we had a lot of. Orange sunshine, this tiny little orange barrel pill. And he had taken 2 hits, and he was upstairs in the attic in our room in this big house where we lived, old house there in the suburbs of New York City. And he was tripping. He was peaking on a LSD trip and listening to music and laying on his bed and hallucinating. And all of a sudden, he felt that these spirits, these forces, these dark forces, were starting to drag him toward the window from the bed where he was lying on, high as a kite. They were trying to drag him to throw him out of the window. In that moment, he wasn't sure if it was a hallucination or what. But one thing was certain. The window was approaching. He was approaching that window. He was being pulled toward the window to be cast out, be thrown out of the 3rd-story house, out the window to the driveway, cement driveway down there. And at that moment, he remembered, in that desperate moment of facing life and death, a serious life and death situation, at that moment, he remembered the preaching of another cousin that we had who was a born-again Christian and who was always talking to us about Jesus Christ and stuff, and Billy Graham. But we always made fun of him, and we really made light of all his preaching and stuff of this other cousin. But at that moment, when my cousin found himself face to face with the possibilities of death, of a certain death, he remembered the preaching of our cousin, and he cried out to Jesus. He prayed to Jesus. He said, Jesus, help me. And when he said the word Jesus, in the middle of his LSD trip, he felt these warm winds come inside the room, and peace invaded the room. The effects of the LSD crazy trip that he was on with having taken 2 tablets left. He got control of himself. Like I said, a warm, loving wind environment filled the room. He was able to lay back down on the bed, no longer being cast out by these dark forces in a fearful experience of possibilities of dying. And this warmth, this peace, this love, and this joy filled his heart instantly. Filled his heart and his mind. And he was, as they say, saved, born again, filled with God's Spirit. Ever since that day, he became a completely different person. It was like the difference between night and day. He totally changed for real. And I knew him. He was my cousin. I lived with him. He was like my brother. He was my brother. I mean, I lived with him more than with my other brothers, because I remember I was adopted by my grandma. And he was too. So he was like my brother, so more than a cousin, and I knew him very well. And something real, some real event had taken place in him. I mean, I'd taken LSD all the time. I know what is what. It wasn't just the LSD. It was a real experience, because if it was just the LSD, then that whole God experience would have only lasted as long as the LSD was in his bloodstream. But no, it lasted forever. I mean, he really changed. He started hanging around with Christians, no longer with us drug people. The business went out the window. Went out the window was not him, but the business, because we used to sell, drugs and stuff. Nobody wanted to come anymore to our house, because all he did was talk about Jesus. Out of 10 words at his mouth, 3 were Jesus. So he scared away all the clients. And he started witnessing. Aggressive, he was with these Christian evangelicals. They were aggressive, proselyters, and witnessing and talking about God and trying to pull people in. And he got on the revolution. He got on the Jesus revolution. He jumped out of the hippie revolution, but it was from one day to the next. It wasn't like a process or going to some kind of therapy or going to some kind of rehab clinic. No, it was a miracle. It was an act of God, and the change was immediate and radical and total. I loved him. I still do. And I was always very polite. So it was my nature. So I tried to listen to him a bit. But I did not understand. His message rolled off of me like water on a duck's back. It went in one ear, it came out the other. I had no idea. I didn't feel anything. Plus, I didn't like Christians. I liked him, but I didn't like his Christian friends. Like I said, they all looked kind of phony to me. But something real had happened in his life, and that was respectable. I wasn't ready. My time didn't come yet till a few years later. But that event in the life of my cousin was a seed. Actually, it was like a time bomb in my self-conscience when I got to the end of my rope, which still was 2 years, something like that, down the road. But that little seed ended up growing. We'll talk about more of the seed, the time bomb of spiritual revolution that came into my life in our next segment. Love to you, peace and love. Hey, be good.